The dust cloud on the horizon was the first sign of trouble as Madeline O'Brien frantically gathered what few possessions she could carry. Her hands trembled as she stuffed clothes into a worn leather satchel, the sound of hoofbeats growing louder with each passing second. It was 1875 in Lincoln, New Mexico territory, and at 22 years old, she never imagined she'd be running for her life from the most dangerous gang in the county. "They'll be here by sundown," Mrs. Patterson warned, peering through lace curtains at the approaching riders. The elderly widow had taken Madeline in after her father's death 3 months prior, and now she was risking her own safety. "You can't be here when they arrive, child." Madeline nodded, her auburn hair falling from its pins as she rushed. "I know. I'll head for the mountains." Her father's pocket watch, the last thing he'd given her, went into her pocket. Everything else of value had already been stolen or destroyed by the Hawkins Gang. "Your pa crossed them something fierce, exposing their cattle-rustling operation," Mrs. Patterson said, handing Madeline a small pouch of coins. "They want retribution, and with him gone, they'll come for you instead." "I never asked to inherit his troubles," Madeline whispered, fighting back tears. "Life rarely asks our permission before handing us our burdens. Now go take the back trail past the creek. There's an abandoned trapper's cabin 2 miles up. Stay there tonight, then keep moving at first light." Madeline hugged the older woman tightly. "I'll repay you someday." "Repay me by staying alive." With her satchel slung across her body and a worn shawl around her shoulders, Madeline slipped out the back door and into the growing shadows of late afternoon. The distant sound of men's voices carried on the wind, spurring her to move faster. The trail was overgrown, brambles catching at her skirts as she hurried toward the foothills. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared anyone within a mile might hear it. When a branch snapped behind her, Madeline froze, pressing herself against the rough bark of a ponderosa pine. A man emerged from the trees, leading a chestnut horse. His broad shoulders were squared beneath a dusty denim jacket, a well-worn Stetson pulled low over his eyes. The revolver at his hip gleamed in the fading light. Madeline's breath caught in her throat. She pressed herself harder against the tree, praying he wouldn't see her. The man stopped, tilting his head slightly. "Madam, I can see your skirts from here. No use hiding. I ain't looking for trouble." Slowly, she stepped into view, her fingers wrapped around the small derringer concealed in her pocket, another of her father's legacies. "Neither am I." "Wyatt Alden," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Just passing through." "You do well to keep passing," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "There's trouble coming." His blue eyes narrowed as he studied her face. "You running from something, miss?" "That's not your concern." A distant shout echoed through the trees, followed by the sound of horses moving at speed. Madeline's eyes widened in panic. "I'd say it just became my concern," Wyatt said, his expression darkening. He moved toward her, leading his horse. "Those men after you?" She nodded reluctantly. "How many?" "5, maybe 6. He whistled low. "That's a heap of trouble for one lady." He glanced back toward Lincoln, then at the darkening sky. "Come on. My camp's not far. They'll ride right past if we're quick and quiet." "I don't know you," Madeline protested. "And I don't know why half a dozen men are hunting you, but I reckon you've got fewer options and questions right now." He held out his hand. "Your choice." The shouts grew closer. Madeline took his hand. Wyatt helped her mount his horse before swinging up behind her. They moved deeper into the forest, away from the trail. His arms reached around her to hold the reins, and despite her fear, Madeline noticed the solid warmth of his chest against her back. "Keep low," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear as they maneuvered through the trees. His camp was in a small clearing beside a stream, hidden from view by a stand of junipers. A small fire pit surrounded by stones sat cold and empty. "We can't risk a fire tonight," Wyatt said as he helped her down. But I've got coffee and jerky, if you're hungry. Why are you helping me? Madeline asked, watching him tether his horse. He shrugged. She barely knew this man, yet in that moment, she believed him completely. My father was the sheriff here, she explained. He uncovered a rustling operation. The Hawkins Gang had been stealing cattle from the big ranches and selling them across the border in Mexico. I've heard of them. Mean bunch. They killed my father 3 months ago. Made it look like an accident during a bank robbery. Her voice cracked. No one could prove otherwise, but I know it was them. And now they're after you because I found his journal. He removed his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. But you don't have to. The trial's in Santa Fe. She nodded. 3 weeks from now. Then that's where we're headed. When she looked at him in surprise, he added, First light. We'll take the mountain trails. It'll be slower, but safer. You don't have to do this, she protested. I know. His smile was barely visible in the darkness. Get some rest, Miss O'Brien. Tomorrow will be a long day. Despite her exhaustion, Madeline slept fitfully, waking at every sound. There's a small settlement about 15 miles northwest Cimarron Springs. Friend of mine has a place there. We can rest up, get supplies. Is it safe? Safer than staying in the open. Tom's a good man, fought with me in the war. He won't ask questions. As they continued their journey, Madeline found herself studying her unexpected protector. Wyatt Alden moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to the wilderness. His face, tanned from years in the sun, carried lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled. She guessed him to be about 30. Were you always a cowboy? He helped her across a particularly slippery stretch of rocks. What about you? What were your plans before all this trouble? Madeline smiled sadly. I was teaching at the school in Lincoln. My mother was a teacher before she died. I always wanted to follow in her footsteps. You'll go back to it when this is over. If I live that long. He stopped, turning to face her fully. You will. I promise you that. They reached Cimarron Springs by nightfall of the second day. For 3 days, they followed narrow paths that wound through pine forests and rocky slopes. At night, they made camp in sheltered ravines or abandoned miners' huts, always careful to keep their fire small and well hidden. On the 4th night, as they sat beside the embers of their cooking fire, Madeline found herself opening up about her father. He wasn't always the sheriff, she said, wrapped in the blanket Wyatt had insisted she take while he made do with his coat. He was a rancher first until my mother died. After that, he couldn't bear to stay on the land they'd built together. I've made my share of mistakes. After the war, I drifted. Fell in with some men who weren't particular about whose cattle they drove to market. You were a rustler? She asked, unable to hide her surprise. For 1 season. Never sat right with me. He poked at the embers with a stick. I left that life behind, but sometimes I wonder if I'm still paying for it. Is that why you stopped to help me? Redemption? His eyes met hers across the fire. No. I helped because it was right. Sometimes it's that simple. The honesty in his gaze made something shift inside Madeline. This man who had risked his safety for a stranger, who had delayed his own plans to protect her, he understood honor in a way few people did. The next morning brought rain, a steady, soaking downpour that turned the trail to mud and limited visibility to mere yards. They pressed on, cloaks pulled tight against the deluge, until Wyatt spotted a rocky overhang large enough to provide shelter. We'll wait it out, he decided, helping Madeline dismount. No sense risking the horses on slippery trails. The overhang formed a shallow cave, just deep enough for them and the horses to get out of the rain. As Madeline wrung water from her skirts, Wyatt managed to start a small fire using dry kindling from his pack. Always keep some dry tinder, he explained, carefully feeding the flames. Lesson I learned the hard way. They huddled close to the fire, sharing coffee from Wyatt's battered tin pot. The rain showed no signs of letting up, drumming steadily on the world outside their shelter. "Tell me about Denver," Madeline said, trying to distract herself from how aware she was of Wyatt's nearness. "What's waiting for you there?" "A fresh start. The ranch owner, Hamilton, is expanding his operation. Wants someone who knows horses to oversee his breeding program." Pride crept into his voice. "It's good land, with a proper house for the foreman. First time I'd have 4 walls that weren't borrowed or rented. It sounds wonderful. It's a chance to build something that lasts." He glanced at her. "What about you? After the trial?" "Here," Wyatt said, moving to sit beside her. He spread his coat over both of them, his arm hesitantly settling around her shoulders. "Better?" She nodded, too cold to worry about propriety. Gradually, his warmth seeped into her, and the shivering subsided. The steady rhythm of his breathing beside her was oddly comforting. "My mother died of fever when I was 16, she said suddenly. "It was winter, like this, cold and wet for days on end. By the time the doctor reached our homestead, it was too late." Wyatt's arm tightened around her. "I'm sorry. Pa never really recovered." His lips were gentle, questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her hand finding the rough stubble of his jaw. When they finally parted, Madeline felt breathless, as though she'd been running. Wyatt's expression was a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. "I shouldn't have," he began. "I'm glad you did," she interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. He smiled then, a true smile that transformed his weathered face. "So am I." "We should go there first." Wyatt shook his head. "Too obvious. They'll be watching it." He guided his horse down a narrow side street. "I know a place we can stay tonight. Tomorrow morning, we'll send word to the marshal." The place turned out to be a small boarding house run by an elderly Mexican woman who greeted Wyatt like a long-lost son. "Señor Alden." "It has been too long," she exclaimed, pulling him down to kiss both cheeks. "And you bring a wife now." "Not a wife, Dona Elena," he corrected gently. "A friend who needs safety and discretion." "I know it's fast, probably too fast, but I've never felt this way about anyone, Madeline." Her heart soared at his words, even as her mind cautioned her about the whirlwind nature of their connection. "It is fast," she agreed. "But I feel it too." He pressed his forehead to hers. "When this is over, when you're safe, we'll take all the time you need. I'll court you properly, if you'll let me." "I'd like that." Their kiss was different this time, deeper, filled with promise and an aching tenderness that brought fresh tears to Madeline's eyes. The marshal arrived before dawn, accompanied by 2 deputies. Marshal James Fleming was a barrel-chested man with a silver mustache and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Miss O'Brien," he greeted her formally. "I'm relieved to see you safe. When we found Mrs. Patterson's house empty, we feared the worst." The deputy who was supposed to guard her never showed, Wyatt said, his tone accusatory. Fleming's expression darkened. Deputy Collins was found dead 2 miles outside of Lincoln. Bullet to the back of the head. "The Hawkins Gang doesn't leave loose ends." He turned to Madeline. "You were lucky this man found you." "I know," she said softly. "We've moved the trial up," Fleming continued. "It starts tomorrow. The territorial governor wants this wrapped up quickly. Too many powerful ranchers are demanding justice." "Is it safe?" Wyatt asked. "As safe as we can make it. We've arrested 3 of the gang members, including Samuel Hawkins himself." The marshal's satisfaction was evident. "Your father's journal provided enough evidence to convince a judge to issue warrants. The remaining members are still at large, but with their leader in custody, they're disorganized." "I'll need to testify," Madeline realized. "Yes, but we'll keep you under guard until then." Fleming glanced between them. "Both of you." They were moved to a hotel near the courthouse, with deputies posted at every entrance. The room was more comfortable than Donna Elena's, but the constant presence of armed men outside their door was a stark reminder of the danger that still lurked. That night, as they sat together on the small sofa in their room, Wyatt took Madeline's hand in his. "After tomorrow, you'll be free to return to Lincoln if you want," he said carefully. Or, she prompted when he hesitated. "Come with me to Denver." The words rushed out of him. "I know it's sudden, and I know you have your teaching, but yes," she said simply. He blinked. Yes, I'll come with you to Denver." Her smile was radiant despite her nerves. "We can make a life there. Together." His joy was palpable as he pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the small room until they were both laughing. The trial began the next morning, with Madeline testifying before a packed courtroom. Samuel Hawkins sat with his captured men, his eyes boring into her with undisguised hatred as she recounted her father's investigation and his suspicious death. When she finished, the prosecutor presented her father's journal as evidence. Page after page detailed the rustling operation, complete with dates, locations, and names including several prominent citizens who had been involved. By late afternoon, the jury had reached a verdict, guilty on all counts. Samuel Hawkins and his men were sentenced to hang in 1 month's time. As they left the courthouse under heavy guard, Wyatt kept Madeline close. "It's over," he said softly. "You did it." "We did it," she corrected him. "I wouldn't be here without you." Marshal Fleming approached them as they reached their hotel. "You should know we captured 2 more of the gang trying to sneak into town this morning. With Samuel and the others sentenced, I believe the threat has been neutralized." He tipped his hat to Madeline. "Your father would be proud, Miss O'Brien." That night, they celebrated with a proper dinner in the hotel restaurant, their first meal in public, without looking over their shoulders. Wyatt had purchased a new shirt for the occasion, and Madeline wore a dress borrowed from the hotel owner's wife. "To new beginnings," Wyatt said, raising his glass. Madeline smiled, clinking her glass against his. "To shelter found in unexpected places." 2 days later, they departed Santa Fe for Denver, traveling with a merchant caravan for additional safety. The journey was leisurely compared to their desperate flight through the mountains, allowing them time to plan their future together. By the time they reached Denver, it was early summer. The Hamilton Ranch spread across rolling hills just outside the growing city, its white-painted buildings gleaming in the sunshine. Edward Hamilton, a silver-haired rancher with a booming laugh, welcomed them warmly. "Alden, thought you'd changed your mind." His gaze shifted to Madeline with frank curiosity. "Had some business to attend to first, sir," Wyatt explained. "This is Madeline O'Brien, my fiancée." The title was new. He'd proposed properly the night before, under a star-filled Colorado sky. Madeline's heart still raced at the memory.
"Fiancé, eh?"
Hamilton's bushy eyebrows rose. "Well, that changes things. The foreman's house will be perfect for a family." He winked at Madeline. "It even has a small room that would make a fine classroom if you've a mind to continue teaching. Our settlement could use a proper teacher." Madeline couldn't hide her delight. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Hamilton." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the local church. Martha and Tom Wilson made the journey from Cimarron Springs to attend, bringing with them news that Samuel Hawkins and his men had been executed as scheduled. "That chapter's closed now," Wyatt murmured to his new wife as they danced at their small reception. "Only new stories ahead." Madeline rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I never imagined when I ran into the forest that day that I was running toward my future, not away from danger." "Sometimes shelter is found where we least expect it," he said, echoing the words he'd spoken that first night in the wilderness. In the years that followed, their life together unfolded with joy and occasional challenges. Madeline established a school for the ranchers' children, earning respect throughout the county for her dedication. Wyatt's breeding program transformed Hamilton's ranch into one of the most successful in Colorado. Their first child, a son they named James after Madeline's father, arrived a year after their wedding. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later. Their home, once simply the foreman's house, became known for its warmth and hospitality. Sometimes on summer evenings, when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, Wyatt and Madeline would sit on their porch and watch the sunset paint the Colorado sky. In those peaceful moments, with his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against him, they would remember the desperate journey that had brought them together, how fear had given way to love, and how a whispered plea for shelter had become the foundation of a life neither could have imagined. "They said I should hide," she would sometimes murmur, smiling at the memory. And he would always answer, pulling her closer, "And I'll always be your shelter."